guys, and now I want to talk about playing on both sides of the board in chess. Sometimes we're not able to create enough progress on one side of the board because either it's locked up or they have too many defenders on that side of the board. This is the famous example of Capablanca versus Janowski, where Capablanca gets the bishop pair, he gets the space advantage, but he's not able to break through right away. Like if black tries to play something like b4, it's not clear whether he can win. First, let's say takes, and after takes, there may be some sort of b4, where after all the trades happen, and we get something like this. White may or may not survive. Like here, we may have rook a3, but even then, that type of position is not clear. So because we're not sure that the attack will work right away, we're not sure that this is winning. Like white may be able to hold this, and he only has a few weaknesses on that side of the board. Plus, he may be able to play something like b3 right away. And after b3, bishop takes, rook takes, and rook takes. This I don't think should be winning, because now all the pawns are on the wrong color for the bishop, and the knight is able to get to some square like c5 or even g5 in the future, where it's white who's playing for the win, not black anymore. Okay, so probably Capablanca had this in mind when he realized that he needs to play on the other side of the board. He did everything he could on the queen side. He got as much space as possible. He still has the weaknesses for the future, but if he is to break through right now, it doesn't give him enough progress, so he needs to create another front first, right? If one front is not enough, we need to create another, and here he creates another front on the king side, where suddenly the bishops can come to life as well. The dark square bishop can't wait to attack the dark squares on these diagonals. So that's why he breaks through, he creates the open g file. Now if for some reason black gets to capture back, now he has the additional weakness on h2 to attack for after something like g4 and even bishop g5, which is a skewer, but even without the skewer, the weakness would be fatal for white. That's why white cannot afford to take, and if he can't afford to take, we can just use the g file at our own accord. Whenever we feel like it, we'll take over the g file and then dominate that too. Now we have the bishop pair looking at the queen side and the king side, with the rooks being able to travel to both sides and attacking wherever they want, right? And so here we use the last blow from the queen side in order to bring in the bishop, who wasn't doing anything, to where he belongs. The bishop belongs on e4, and let's get it there now. And even though you may be able to hold the knight for now, later on I will break your conception here. I will break this whole barrier and barricade, and when the barricade is gone, that's it, I can win material. And here, after he wins the exchange, the rest of the game was quite simple. So once again, he wasn't able to break through on the queen side, so he has to create a new king side front in order to distract the white pieces who can't defend everything. So then the next example I wanted to show is from one of my games, where we're going to be black. And in this game, I was thinking about the weak light squares in front of my king. So first of all, I have to watch out for my king, because if these guys were reversed, I'd be in big trouble. And one day they may be reversed, which is what happened in the game. So I have to first of all cover the h7 square, but second of all start an attack on the king, because I have the two open files and I should try to use them. Plus I do have the bishop pair here. All right. So I prepare for the king side attack. I get my pieces in the right place. I create threats like d4 and get the pawns ready to roll. And only after all of that, after covering the h7 square with my rook, I can start thinking about how am I going to checkmate him. He plays something like king h1, and even though I have all my rooks perfectly placed, I have to start thinking about how am I going to break through. I cannot take on g2 because checkmate. Even though my pieces are basically perfect, right? My queen could come here, but it won't really do much. So I realized that in order to break through right now, I'm going to need to create a second front. My bishop pair is begging for black to create a second front. I cannot just break through on the king side because they have enough defenders there, right? They have the rook, they have the second rook, they have the queen, and the knight can always help out if anything. So that's why I didn't really believe in the checkmate chances for black. so I have to attack on another side. First, I threaten to trade off the bishop, and around here I realized, okay, I could trade off the bishop, but that also loses the bishop pair. Instead, we always want to have these options of going to both sides of the board, as this game showed, because after he plays this weak defensive move, just doing nothing and not seeing my threat at all, I happen to have the counter blow on the queen side, because my bishops are better at playing both sides of the board than the knight is. And so even if he plays something like knight e2, it turns out that his queen is not feeling very comfy here, and she's running out of squares very fast. And after queen d4, either he loses the rook on f1 or he loses the knight on e2. So this was already close to losing position, but especially after he played knight d1, that's just a extra exchange for me. And with the extra exchange, now we can once again play on both sides of the board. We go back to the open file where we're able to first defend our weaknesses and then slowly but surely push up the pawns. The e-pawn didn't really matter. All I needed is just one pass pawn in order to break through. And here I just need to break the blockade. So I interfere with the bishop's connection to the knight, and he runs out of checks, so the knight is doomed and we're promoting. Okay, so what just happened there? In order to break through on the king side, I needed to create a second front on the queen side once again. The last example is really extraordinary, so I'm going to show it from black's point of view. Right now, we are going to be black, okay? And we have two knights, we have the attack, we have the initiative. But the problem is, after white's last move, we realized that it's not so easy to break through, right? Like, how are we going to get to this king? Are we going to play knight h4 and knight takes g2? Maybe, but they can always cover it with something like rook takes f2, and I'm sure that black didn't believe in his attack either. That's why he decides that he needs to control all sides of the board before he crushes through, right? So he starts thinking about weakened squares. Like, what squares can we use? The bishop is severely limited. It has no scope, right? And it has no future anywhere on the board, right? Because of these pawns, mostly, as well as the pawn on g5. Can we play something like g4? No, the last move made sure of that. Can we play something like f5 and g4? Even then, it's going to be quite difficult. For example, let's say we play knight d6 right now. Maybe they can start thinking about moves like f4 themselves. Now, at the right moment, of course, maybe they're not ready yet, but this attack is bound to fail because white can bring in enough defenders. He's got the knight, he's got the two rooks there, the queen is not too far. It's not clear how black is going to crush through, even if he tries to play for g4. So that's where black realized he needs to prepare with his pieces first. That's why he goes for the outposts. And after he starts getting the outposts, things become a lot easier. And he gets the outposts on the other side of the board. So first he improves this knight, since that knight was already doing good, and restricting the white knight for that matter, right? And now after he gets the first outpost, he starts playing on both sides. First, he scares the king into running away, and then he says, first of all, let me fix your weakness on a3. I want to make sure it doesn't go anywhere. And now let's bring the knight back to help his brother. Okay, and he goes all the way from the king side to the queen side, since all the white pieces are now stuck here, especially this knight. This rook is stuck on the king side, so now we can focus on all these weaknesses that he's got there. And now we say, oh, just kidding, since your king is here, now I can play on both sides of the board. Now I can also open up the f-file if needed. I can go for the f-file, or I can close things up, which makes things even harder for the bishop on e2. It cancels out his scope even more, right? The knight is stuck protecting his pawns, protecting his weaknesses that were created by g4, the consequences of g4. And now we can focus on getting more outposts, like this square on e3. And all that we need for that is to get a rook to e8 and chase off this rook so that we can play knight e3 ourselves, which is what he does. Also, there is a cute queen trap in the air that white has to watch out for. That's why white had to move back the bishop to avoid the queen trap. And after our knights invade, all of them are coming through the queen side to get to the king side. So let's take a look at this knight march. First, we take over the E file, the only open file on the board. Now we get into E3, this beautiful outpost. We bring back the knights to cover both sides of the board again. And then after rook h4, we're able to focus in on the last weakness that white has on the king side, the h3 pawn, because it may be protected, but not for long and not by enough pieces. Our knights are slowly coming in from the queen side into the king side through the center. And we are scared about the bishop, so let's watch out. Let's make sure we're safe first. Now that they try to cover this weakness, we can also get closer to the king and land on g3. When the knight is that close to the king and on an outpost, it's completely deadly. There is no hope for white anymore, and in fact, white resigned. Look how useless white's pieces are. Yeah, none of them can move. If the knight moves, sorry, bye-bye, you're losing h3. If the rook moves, well, that was another threat that black had, the double sacrifice. And then after king runs away, we have a nice checkmate in a few moves, and if the king takes, we have the queen coming in because we have all the space to transfer through. Okay, and so because the knights were so beautiful and on such beautiful outposts such as c4 and g3, because we used both sides of the board, in order to get to the king side, we had to go through the center and from the queen side, right? Only because we used both sides of the board, we were able to invade their position and later on checkmate them, as we saw here. If he does anything else, once again we have the threat of takes, 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 and maybe here it doesn't work, but let's say the rook goes to b1, now it definitely works. Takes, 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 and after check, we have the checkmate on h1. Okay, so it worked because, once again, we transferred the pieces from one side of the board to the other. So try to create a second front when one front is not working. Hope that helps.